One of my favorite stories in the Dhammapada is about discipline. It's the story of a 7-year-old monk who is the student of Sariputra, the right hand of the Buddha. And the story goes that this little boy, 7-year-old monk, one day he's walking with his teacher into a village on his alms round. So going into the village where people will give them food. And as they're on their way there, the two together, the young boy and his teacher, the young boy looks around and he's attentive to what he sees and he's curious, like a lot of young boys. And at some point, as they're passing by some fields, he notices that the farmers are digging channels in their fields to direct the water from the river into their fields to irrigate. So he asks his teacher, "Sir, can water that has no mind be trained like this?" And the teacher answers, "Yes, don't you see? Of course the water that has no mind can be trained." So he's thinking, okay. So they continue on, and then, so the next thing he sees is that there are men who are making arrows. That's their profession, that's their craft. So they have their pieces of wood and they're carving them to be perfectly straight. And so again, he looks at that for a moment, and then he turns to his teacher, "Sir, can wood which has no mind be trained?" "Yes. Don't you see those Fletchers straightening their arrows?" Now he's calculating still a bit more. And then the third thing he sees is that there are men who have pieces of timber that they are bending and carving to shape into cartwheels. So the piece of wood that was once a tree is now being cut, bent, heated, joined together into the shape of a cartwheel. Totally a different shape. And again, once again, he asks his teacher, "Sir, this wood, this hard wood that has no mind, is being trained, just like the other things?" And Sariputra says yes. And so then, very soon afterwards, then not long, the little boy has finished his calculation, so he's come to this conclusion, this wonderful conclusion that he tells his teacher, "So, the water can be trained, it has no mind. The arrows can be trained, they have no mind. The timber that can be trained, and it has no mind. So what about me? I have a mind. Me too, I can be trained. I can purify my mind. May I please go back to my hut? Sir, I would like to go meditate." And so Sariputra looks at him and he sees this little boy is quite serious, so he says, yes, go. I will bring you food later." And then by midday, so that's in about maybe 3 hours, 4 hours maximum, the little boy has become Arahant. So this story is about discipline, the quality of training yourself. It's a constant thing that is repeated often in the teachings of the Buddha. He has to train himself, he says. The monk has to train himself. He trains himself in this way. He trains himself in that way. He trains himself. Or we should say he trains his mind. The cleverness of the little boy of only 7 years old, what he realizes or what he understands is this mind is just the same as anything in material. The things in material are not fixed as they are. A tree doesn't have to always stay the same shape. It can be trained according to our will and by our actions. The river that looks as though it has always run in the same way and always made the same shape across the land has not actually even always made the same shape across the land. It's each individual drop that has gradually, throughout thousands and thousands of years, carved itself into the land. So by its habit of flowing in that way, it has carved itself its path. We can dig a canal and make it go in a totally different direction if we want. And the mind is the same. The first step, if you like, in applying good discipline is to realize that the mind can be trained, that it's not a fixed thing. We tend to get stuck thinking of it as fixed because we think of it as I am like that. I am not good at this. I am good at that. I am shy. I am not courageous. This is me, my character. By definition, when we say this, it means that we fix it. We can't change it. We can't discipline it. But this is not the case. Of course our mind can be trained. Of course we can be trained. And we can train ourselves. Now, of course, I should make it clear that I'm not talking about training ourselves to be a great athlete, or training to be a great musician, or training to be a great businessman, or something like that. Specifically, what we're talking about here is training ourselves and practicing, 1, to be moral in thoughts, words and actions. 2, to train in meditation, to develop concentration. In order to, 3, develop wisdom. In Pali, it is known as sila, samadhi, panna. Sila means morality, samadhi refers to meditation, concentration, and panna means wisdom. So the first place where we apply discipline is in perfecting or developing the first step, sila, morality. Goodness, righteousness of thoughts, words and actions. We talked a little bit about the definition of what is right, what is good in another video, but basically in this context, or for the purpose of this subject, I would define it in this way, that whatever is wrong is whatever thoughts, words or actions cause harm to yourself or to others or to both. And whatever is right is whatever does not cause harm. By keeping yourself blameless and harmless at the level of thoughts, words and actions, I repeat this many times because most of the time we think of it just as being in terms of actions or possibly with words. But if you really keep yourself to be blameless and harmless in thoughts, words and actions, then the highest gift that you give to yourself is that you have freedom from regret. You protect yourself from regret, from shame, from guilt. This is the most respectful way you can treat yourself and others. And already this has a lot of benefits, among which it brings the benefit that it is possible to develop concentration. Concentration is also very closely linked with morality, and they depend on each other, in the sense that, for one thing, if you are lying, killing, stealing, committing adultery, not to mention consuming alcohol and drugs, how do you want to concentrate? It's impossible for your mind to be at peace. Absolutely impossible. Forget about it. So first of all, you have to practice at least basic morality in order to at least have the basic level of concentration. Right meditation, right concentration is also necessary and linked with morality, because without having meditation, without having mindfulness and observation of the mind, then we're just automatically talking, thinking and acting without knowing. So how are we supposed to correct or change or discipline any of these things? So the meditation is the discipline is meditation. And also I want to be clear that this is not about just it's not about control, suppressing. It's very important to understand the difference between control and discipline. They're not the same thing. And just control, suppression on its own, it can actually have very bad consequences. You don't actually solve the problem at all. You just sort of push it under the surface and pretend it's not there, but you don't really solve the root of it. I would compare it to, for example, one control is you have a crazy mad dog and you chain him. You just have a chain on him. But he hasn't been trained, he hasn't learned anything. He hasn't had any discipline. He doesn't know what he should do and what he shouldn't do. But discipline means training. Discipline means teaching the dog how to behave himself. So this means teaching the mind how to behave itself. Not only teaching yourself how to behave physically, outwardly in your words and actions, but teaching your mind how to think well, in order not to cause distress and suffering for yourself and others, basically. So we discipline ourselves for the sake of developing goodness, morality, in terms of thoughts, words and actions, sila. We discipline ourselves and train ourselves then to have concentration, meditation. And when there is morality and concentration, based on these two, then wisdom can arise.